First of all, I'm not sure whether I mute myself early on, so apology for that. Let me start again. Good morning, afternoon, and evening. Sawadee krab. First of all, for your information, this webinar is available both in English and Thai. Kindly see at the lower end of your screen where there is a globe sign. Click there and select the languages. I recommend you to do so, and you need to press mute original as well if you don't want to hear the other languages. Though I will use English as the main language, some of our speakers may speak Thai, and I might switch to Thai while addressing some of the speakers and participants today. Please allow me to switch to Thai briefly. สวัสดีครับ การเสวนาวันนี้มีการแปลเป็นภาษา
Good afternoon. For today's webinars, we have English and Thai interpretation. So please observe at the bottom of your screen, there is the icon, that is a globe icon, and then you can click interpretations and select the language of your choice. You can also select Thai or English, and if you do not want to hear the audio from the floor, you can click mute original, and then you can only hear the interpretation. So now I'd like to go back to use English.
The online webinar titled Battling Inequality in Food Supply Chains, a Post-Pandemic Talk on Living Wage. My name is Chakchai Chomthongdi, the Private Sector Engagement Lead for Oxfam in Asia. I'm tasked to be both your host for the next 90 minutes, together with moderating the discussion. This event is co-organized by the CSO Coalition for Ethical and Sustainable Seafood, together with Oxfam in Asia. The session is recorded and is also available on Oxfam in Asia Facebook page in English, live stream there, as well as live stream in Thai at the Oxfam in Thailand Facebook page. So you can share or watch the session again later from there. Many of us are well aware that wages and income for a large number of the women and men who are growing, producing, and processing food for us are dangerously low. At the same time, we now have some of the key players in the sector who has paid the attention and make steps towards the wage that would ensure at least basic but decent standard of living, taking into consideration food, housing, transportation, education, medical, and unexpected events, for example. Therefore, the objective today for today's discussion, we aim to discuss collective benefits and challenges in tackling wage in food supply chain, both from the business and workers' perspectives. To understand private sector experiences and their key learnings on achieving living wage in their supply chain, and the workers and CSO views on the matter. And lastly, to explore collective efforts in pursuing living wage objectives at different levels. For this, we have with us today exciting speakers from both Asia and Europe, and from the business sectors, as well as civil society representatives. Before meeting the panelists and start the discussion, I would like to invite John Samuel, the Regional Director of Oxfam in Asia, for around 10 minutes to give his opening remarks. John, the mic is yours. Thank you.
Dear friends, colleagues, and co-travelers, we are all here to fight injustice, to fight inequality, and to ensure a living wage to all. And in this particular living wage forum is an important milestone in our struggle to ensure equal wages to men and women, and also to ensure that in the food supply and food chain industry, particularly seafood industry, to ensure there is a living wage and a decent wage. We really look at the Sustainable Development Goal, Agenda 2030. one of the most important part is SDG 5, that is to ensure gender equality. When it comes to living wage, we know women workers in this particular sector, particularly in the food industry, especially seafood industry, they get 29% less than the men. And this is not something very new. It has been all over, both in the informal sector and formal sector. And this is something which perpetuates inequality, gender equality. And this is SDG 5. And then let's go to straight to SDG 10. That is about addressing the whole causes and consequences of inequality. And as we know, during the pandemic, the richest became richer and the poor became poorer across. And the debt burden on poor workers working in food industry, and that's the irony. You know, the food industry is supposed to give food for the middle class and the rich. But those who work in the food industry face both hunger and poverty because there is no living wage. And if you really look at, again, let me come back to SDG 8. It's about decent work. It's about decent wage and economic growth. So we are living in a stage where there is an economic growth of the rich, the 1 to 3% of the people, and Asia has a widening inequality, which is economic inequality, social inequality, environmental inequality, into political inequality. And this is very evident in the seafood industry, especially the shrimp farming. And Thailand has some of the biggest food corporations, seafood corporations in Asia and the world. And it's not only Thailand. You look at Vietnam, you look at Cambodia, you look at every part. What's happening is those people who are working in this industry, particularly seafood industry, are at the receiving end of this inequality and injustice. And this is an unjust system where during the pandemic, the largest number of people face not only COVID virus, but also a bigger virus of poverty and debt. And meanwhile, it is during this COVID time, the rich became richer and that their profit increased significantly. And this is the irony of our times. And hence, this living wage forum is happening at a very, very appropriate time. In the post-COVID situation, we have seen what's happening in Sri Lanka. And we have seen how the poor, the workers, those who work in both food industries and others, face the brunt of what you call both economic and political crisis. So we are living in a very, very difficult predicament of history and our times. And this inequality, where people who make food, working in the food industry, get
I think there is a challenge with the connection. May I ask
inequality.
Okay, we have John back.
Can you
yeah, I think we lost you for around 4 to 5 seconds, John.
So the key point about it is, while the CEO and the big promoters have huge profit and huge bonus, and those workers who are working in this seafood industry are hardly getting any money to meet their ends. And this perpetuates an unjust system and inequality. Hence, I think it is more than ever, it is a moral responsibility, political responsibility to stand up with those workers and say, yes, the world got together and committed at the United Nations, the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030. And we say, this system is not sustainable. It's an extractive system, it's an exploitative system, and you just name any SDG, it violates in an unequal system. And hence, it is very important to do advocacy and also extend solidarity on behalf of Oxfam International, all our colleagues and our partners and our supporters all over the world and in Asia. We wanted to extend full solidarity to this Living Wage Forum, and we want to stand up with those workers, men and women, who work at a time of this post-pandemic with less wages, and we demand equality of wages between men and women to ensure gender equality. We demand not only a living wage, a decent wage for their life sustainability, to ensure all SDGs from 1 to 5, and ensure a world without poverty, a world without inequality, and a world without injustice. So we have to call upon again and again that justice prevails, peace prevails, and gender equality is a precondition to make a difference in the world. And we are committed to make a difference in the world. We stand up with all of you in solidarity. We stand up with all the workers who are not only in the food industry and others who are not really getting a living wage, for justice and for equal wages to everyone, and for living wage. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John, for your kind remarks. It's such a important point that you share with us on the challenge that women and men who are producing food are facing these days, and also provide really put and positive energy into driving this discussion of how we're tackling unjust wage forward. Thank you once again. We would now move to the discussion. Please allow me to introduce our distinguished panelists in alphabetical order. First, Ms. Carla Fowler, Senior Food, Farming, and Fisheries Advisor at the Ethical Trade Initiative, or ETI. Carla focuses on supporting membership of ETI to realize the International Labour Organization conventions via the ETI base code. This means tackling issues in company supply chains via tripartite dialogue with unions and non-governmental organizations. Carla's background is in agriculture science and anthropology, within which she has focused on the connection between global policies in nutrition and agricultural livelihoods. Carla had the privilege to work in several African countries and has lived in the Middle East. She previously worked at Save the Children and Oxfam Great Britain, and is motivated by the challenge of helping people to work better together despite their differences. So we have with us, Carla is with us today. We shall move to the next person, which is Ms. Rachel Carbon-Warden, the Global Director, Human Rights of Unilever Global. After spending her previous career in UK politics, including working in the Prime Minister's political office in 10 Downing Street, and as head of the international relation for the Labour Party. Rachel joined Unilever in 2008 after working in Unilever UK and Ireland on external affairs. She joined Unilever's global head office in 2012, leading on corporate responsibilities. Since then, she has worked in the Chief Sustainability Office, on social impact, and in supply chain as part of the integrated social sustainability team. She now sits in the global sustainability team as global director for human rights, working across the business on Unilever human rights strategies. We also have representative from Charoen Pokphand Food or CPF. For those of you who have noticed on the announcement, we have the name of Kun Pimonrat or Miss Pimonrat. Unfortunately, Ms. Pimonrat has sent her excuse because there's an urgent matter that she needs to attend. But the good news is we have Mr. Cho Kittipong Thawon from CPF with us today. Kun Cho has been working for CPF as head of the compensation and benefits and performance management over the past 2 years. Before taking his position, he had been working for different corporations in various business sectors and acquiring solid in-depth knowledge as well as extensive experiences in this particular field. He had been working in the automotive sectors for over 7 years and 4 more years in banking and finance. He also have another 4 to 5 year experience in electronic and consulting firm. So welcome Kun Chok to the discussion today. Last but not least, Ms. Suthasini Kaewleklai, the National Coordinator of the Migrant Workers' Rights Network or MWRN. Kun Suthasini has been working for 6 years with MWRN, which is a key member of the CSO Coalition on Ethical and Sustainable Seafood. Kun Suthasini has been working since 18 years old as a garment factory worker herself and has joined and been an active member of a worker unions since she was 20 years old. Over the 30 years journey, she has been a strong advocate for workers' rights, rights of association, and collective bargaining, both for Thai and migrant workers. Before we start, I would like to invite all participants to use this chat box, both in Zoom meeting itself, and for those of you who follow on Facebook pages, to share your comment and questions in the chat box. We will collect your questions to ask the panelists. Please also indicate who you wish to address your question to. If time allows, we will also invite participants to open the mic and share their thoughts and questions at the end of the discussion. For the panelists, kindly keep your speech at a lower pace than usual, and I will need to remind myself as well to accommodate our interpreter. So without further ado, allow me to start the discussion. Okay, I think this is where we are all here. So I would first turn to Kun Suthasini, asking Kun Suthasini about the current situation. พี่ปิ๊กครับในฐานะที่
คุณปิ๊ก you are the frontline staff. You have been exposed to workers every day, and you are experiencing, heard about their issues. What are the situations of wages for workers before and during COVID-19? Just focus on what you have been countering. As for the solution, we will discuss the solutions later. As for the situations of wages before and during COVID-19 and after COVID-19, please tell us about the change in this. You have to unmute your microphone so that we can hear you. Kun Suthasini, good afternoon. I would like to say good afternoon to all participants, all the panelists in this webinar. If we talk about wages and workers, they are important for the lives of workers. Wages are important for the lives of workers. Wages before COVID-19, they were never adjusted for many years. They never changed for many years before COVID-19. The prices of commodities for their living, the living of workers and non-workers increased. I can say that almost every year, every month, even every month, the prices of commodities increase, but the wages for workers, we always hear the term minimum wages, but fair wages and living wages. We heard about them, but we have never seen this happen to workers. As for wages, they are very low all the time. When workers, in some establishments, the companies do not provide them with food, travel allowance for them. They don't provide this for them, even before COVID-19, okay? And workers, they have to pay for their breakfast, right? For lunch, they have to pay for that, and for dinner. From our findings, from what we found, for food in the morning, they have to pay 40 baht. For lunch, 40 baht. In the evening, they should pay around 60 baht for their dinner. They want to eat natural dishes, they have to pay more. And the money they have to pay for transport. This does not include accommodation, 200 baht per day. As for minimum wages for Thailand, 321 baht. So workers cannot survive because workers, they were not alone. They are not alone. They have parents and they get married and they have children. So these wages, they allow them to support themselves. But to support their parents and families, they have to use money of the future. They have to borrow money. They have to be in debt so that they can support their parents, to their children, that they live with their parents. As for rental, for workers, most workers, they are not local people. For Thai people, mostly they come from the northeastern part of Thailand, the southern part of Thailand, the northern part of Thailand. They are not local people. And mostly, we have found migrant workers who have migrated from another country. They don't have their own residence. They have to rent accommodation and rental. The cheapest rate, 1,500 baht per month. Electricity and water. We are renting a house. They don't collect the water bill as the government specified, but it is an extra charge, not an ordinary charge. The fact that there is no increase in the wages, the workers cannot survive. They cannot survive. The fact that they cannot survive, they have to work OT, they have to work overtime, so that to find a way to get extra money to allow them to survive. So they have to work harder. So their lives, the life of workers, they have poor physical conditions because they don't have time to take a rest, because they have to earn more to take care of themselves and to support their family. Thank you, Kun Pik. I would like to ask you a question. Given the situation of low income and expenses, which are and the wages are not enough, plus this COVID situation, self-protection, prevention of diseases, and social distancing. I don't know what is the level of the realization and how it is linked to low income and men and women. I don't know the difference between them in terms of burden. And during COVID-19, it is a pandemic that we haven't expected. We didn't expect COVID-19. It is a crisis. So when crisis happened, it is not the crisis of operators, but workers. You know, they ask the workers to stop working without payment in some situation because taking a leave during quarantine at least 14 days. And they stopped working without getting paid. Apart from that, the government, you know, the companies that don't support them in terms of food and accommodation during taking leave or during quarantine, they didn't get the support from operators. Some of them were laid off. Some of them received 50% compensation. The COVID-19 crisis is the crisis of workers because employers didn't think that these workers have worked with them for 10 years, 8 years, 5 years with them. And the profit they have made, they have never shared this with the workers to take care of the workers during COVID-19. So it has made them have hardship during COVID-19, you know, and pandemic worsened the situation, but no one took care of them during the crisis. Actually, operators should take care of the workers. They have to make sure that the workers receive protection support. But during COVID-19, they have no job and they got 50% patient compensation. And they have to stay together, the workers, so they don't know how to control disease. They cannot protect themselves. You know, 1, 2 rooms, 3 rooms, they merge, they stay together so that they can survive. They stay together now, given the insufficient income. But as for males and females and CSOs, we have conducted, you know, survey, sending out questionnaires. We have found that the seafood industry, the wages are 60% receive less than, you know, money less than the minimum wage. It is strange. Why? There must be difference between the wages between men and women. Why women received less wages than men? I don't know. What is the logic of the operators? Why they pay based on gender? Why they pay to women less than to that of men? I understand that many companies have policies and measures to respond to this differently. As Kunpik, you have said, you know, some people, some workers get compensation 50%, some are laid off, some have to take a short leave, but people with overburdened are workers who receive a low income already. And this is continuous from the difference without intention or with intention. There is a gap between the wages between men and women.
I was muting myself. My apologies once again. So Carla, I would like to turn to you. I'm not sure whether you were able to read my lips. Okay, sorry for
I
that.
would love to have that skill. Unfortunately, I don't. But I'm
So I
relieved
need to
it's not
repeat
just
myself.
me. I couldn't
Yes.
hear you. Sorry.
Yeah.
Please
So I would like
do.
to
Thank you.
continue from Kun Suthasini, if I may. You know, Kun Suthasini focus on certain sectors and in this geographical, you know, area. But have you observed the recent trend in terms of, you know, wages and also the emerging kind of like momentum on living wage as well? Has the pandemic put a pause on the move towards living wage? What is so the recent trend on wages itself and on living wage? But sorry to also ask another question before going into that question. If you can just briefly help explain to us what is living wage for maybe those of many of the participants who joined today might not be really familiar with the concept. Thank you, Carla.
Thanks so much, Jacques Chai, and to the previous speaker as well. I would love to be able to pronounce your name properly, but I think I probably will not if I try. But that was really enlightening and really helpful, I think, to have that very specific example of what is happening right now in Thailand. And I think we can broaden that out and extrapolate and see a broader global pattern here of workers' rights that have been negatively affected during COVID. So huge thank you for inviting me here today to discuss this with you. You may have seen that recently we highlighted as ETI the situation for migrant workers in the seafood industry in the UK. Different issues, but same vulnerability. So we know globally that 2/3 of people below the poverty line are agricultural workers, they're farmers, and they're their dependents. And that is a huge source, or it should be a huge source, I think, of shame globally. And for us to benefit from those cheap food sources, it's totally unacceptable that those who supply our food, that those who bring it to us, are those who are suffering the most in terms of food insecurity, poor nutrition, and overall poverty. So just to answer your question now, Jack, living wage, as ETI, we don't tend to stipulate what that is, but it is more than minimum wage. And often, I think discussion can come down to what the minimum is, what the bare minimum is to provide to survive. And we are not just talking about bare survival, we are talking about thriving and well-being. So first off, a living wage is one where people have access to health, so they can access a healthcare system when they need it and their dependents can. They have access to education, they have access to food, they have access to water, good housing, fair and decent employment. So that, and that's obviously when we're talking about wages, that's one aspect, but we also need to think more broadly. And I think in these discussions, sometimes we can get focused on methodology, and what we know is that ultimately nobody is being paid enough. So how do we shift that is the big question I have. And it's one I'd love to discuss further. But essentially, having just enough to survive is not a living wage. It needs to be more, and we need to be much more ambitious.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you. I would like to invite Kun Chok from CP. Well, of course, the title here is living wage, and I just hear from Carla also. So for CP, why living wage? For those of you who may not follow the recent development, the company is committed to pay all employees a living wage by 2023. And for many, this is a significant development. So in the first round, what was the reason behind such a bold move by CP? So on living wage, why you see it's important issues, and what came to the decision of such a commitment on achieving living wage in the time frame given. Thank you.
Okay. So I would like back to mention this is coming from the CPF vision. The CPF recognize that employees are valuable assets, where it's called principle that help drive organization towards success and sustainable growth. Include care and teach employee and worker in accordance with human rights principle that they align with the principle of universal declaration of human rights. Treat employee equality according to right based on value and principle. Develop human in accordance with individual appropriate potential and expertise. along enhance employee quality of life as well as living wage that's suitable with local economic and social conditions. Where is empathy the place of promote principle and value differentiation to create value of employee and create inspiration of work into place of potential.
Yeah.
First
คุณโชค
step we have
คุณโชค
study why
so
living
sorry
wage
to
is good for
intervene
organization.
คุณโชคครับ we can't perfectly hear your voice. If you don't mind, maybe speak up or closer to the mic. That would be helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay. First step we have study why living wage is good for organization. Early in 2021, the company had planned for living wage based on data จาก from 3 living wage institute and leading company. First is a fair wage network. Second is a living wage. Third is Asia Force Wage. During the study, we are finding alignment through companies that have living wage policy. It helps to increase worker morale. The health of employee is improved and effect of quality of service. It's also reduce turnover rate, reduce recruitment costs, help to reduce absenteeism rate. Employee turnover and training costs. For economic benefits show that high wage create job and help small business. This is because cost of living giving worker more purchasing power and buy local business. ครับ
Thank you ครับคุณโชคครับขอบคุณครับ I think the sound system may be for next round. I think we were able to capture the key point that mentioned, and there are so many interesting points that we want to really build upon. But then maybe if you can, making sure that the mic is near, and if the sound is, if you can speak up just a little bit. Thank you. So you mentioned about. Very interestingly, of build up the living wage upon a certain standard from 3 sources. That is one thing that we like to build on. But another thing is that you mentioned about the benefit, not only to the workers itself, but also to the companies of that. After really applying living wage, you have seen some reduction in certain costs like turnover, recruitment, and so on. So can you maybe elaborate on that very point a little bit further on, whether that is according to what you anticipated, before applying these, and to what extent, this has happened so far. Thank you very much, ครับคุณโชค
The figure is coming from like the turnover rate of company is very high. If we are compare with the market industry, currently our turnover rate for worker is around 45%. It means that if you will calculate the huge amount from like the turnover, you will have a lot of indirect costs, as I mentioned, right? For example, our recruitment have to lose the time to finding the capable employee to replace, and then another hand, we have lose opportunity in terms of productivity, because if our worker coming in our organization, we have the time to training them to list for the certain skill. It means that for example, the less skill we need training 1 month, it means that we lost the productivity 1 month. For another higher level, we need the longer time for training them. It means we have a lot of costing, but it's not mean that it's not mean show in the accounting, but we see in the root cause from this side of thing.
Thank you very much, and thank you for speaking up. I think it's much clearer, so it's really helpful. My apologies, just one follow-up question. It's very interesting because Kun Suthasini mentioned about migrant workforce, and I know that CP provide huge number of jobs to migrant workers, especially in the food industry. Have you seen, with lower skill workers workforce and those who are doesn't have the flexibilities of moving jobs, such as migrant workforce, which is normally kind of like built it into the structure to MOU between government and cross-border issues and so on, how living wage contribute to have contribute or show any kind of a change in terms of, I don't know, productivities or participation of workers? Yes, please.
Okay, we aim to as I mentioned earlier, right now we have a turnover around 45%. We try to reduce turnover around 20%. It means that company will reduce the cost for recruitment cost and their cost for training, right? And then on the other hand, we try to encourage employee to build up their skill and knowledge. Mean they have opportunity and have chance to go to higher level. It means the income coming also.
Thank you so much, Khap Kun Chok, for this round. Please allow me to move to Rachel. As Unilever is one of the first mover when it's come to living wage, not on food specifically, but also in general. Even with the commitment to achieve living wage by 2030, not only in Unilever own operation, but up to the first tier of the supply chain. What was the key reason for Unilever commitment on realizing living wage? Rachel, please shed the light for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's a real honor and privilege to speak with you on this absolutely critical discussion. I'm always very humble when I'm on panels such as these, because I'm very aware that all companies such as Unilever still have many issues to resolve within global value chains. So I come here very much with that perspective and understanding. Maybe to answer your question, I'll actually go back to 2013 and mention Oxfam. As some of you may be aware, back in 2013, Oxfam published the results of analysis that they had done. It'd been mutually agreed between Unilever and Oxfam of our operations within Vietnam, and also looking at some of our suppliers and really seeing whether our global policies were actually being implemented and what the reality was on the ground. And one of the findings that Oxfam had in what was at the time really seen as quite a groundbreaking, transparent report was that we had an issue with wages of our own direct employees in our Cu Chi factory in Vietnam. And I think it's fair to say that led to lots of internal discussion, both at the global level, but also at the local level. And it also culminated in a strengthening of what was then our Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, and a whole pillar around fairness in the workplace and implementation of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. And importantly, the creation of a framework for fair compensation. And one of the elements of that was the payment of a living wage to all Unilever's direct employees. So the framework was launched in 2014, we piloted in 2015 and started to roll out in 2016. And by 2020 had achieved the payment of a living wage. And my first comment is, of course, to eradicate global poverty in agricultural supply chains, and indeed all supply chains. Of course, wages and the number is important, but as Cara also alluded to, it's more than the number. It's about how that wage is paid. It's about equal pay for equal work. It's about clear contracts, transparent contracts, clear wage slips, no discrimination. Absolutely critical. And of course, it's absolutely about employment opportunities of decent work. My second comment that's really important, and I think also to answer your question, is it's really important that we see that living wage is the floor. It's not the ceiling. And it absolutely should be used to support freedom of association and collective bargaining and not replace it. So over the years, as we implemented in our own operations, we had many learnings. The importance of building capability and understanding amongst our human resources and financial colleagues, having clarity on definitions, what was in, what's out in terms of the calculation of a living wage, and of course, governance and verification. As you say, in January of 2021, we expanded this commitment to everyone directly providing goods and service to Unilever to earn at least a living wage, as you say, but also a living income. And that's really important, particularly in global agricultural supply chains. And so that's all our direct suppliers. And in terms of living income, that's within those key commodities for us. So that's tea, palm oil, cocoa, vegetables, and vanilla. So and there are priority crops where we have the most number of smallholder farmers, where we have the transparency of the smallholder farmers, and where we have those programs. So that means that's affecting countries including India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam. So again, why did we do this? As our CEO has said, climate change and inequality are the two biggest challenges that we collectively face. And collectively is really important because, as you say, collaboration is critical. And we simply cannot achieve the SDGs unless we really address this issue. In my role looking at human rights across the business, of course, the key fundamental element of living wage is that being able to earn a living wage is an enabler for workers to access a whole range of other human rights. So absolutely critical. Equally, unless you address other human rights, you cannot address correctly a living wage. So you have to look at working hours. You have to look at discrimination. You have to look at the eradication of forced labor. And as my colleague said, you have to look at things like debt bondage, recruitment fees, because there is no point enabling a worker to earn a living wage if they are still paying back recruitment fees, debt bondage. So absolutely critical. And as my colleague from CP Food said, there's a real advantage for businesses, for workers to earn a decent wage. Economies cannot survive if income is not fairly distributed. And if people are not earning enough, then they simply don't have enough money to put back into the economy and to buy many of the products that my company and other companies are producing. And I also recognize that our own purchasing practices as Unilever are also really important in terms of whether a supplier can afford to or not afford to pay a living wage. So our approach has really been about benchmarking and understanding in terms of our suppliers. We've identified priority countries where the legal minimum wage and the living wage gap is the biggest, where that social safety net, which I know is a phrase that Oxfam uses, is the weakest, and where we actually have the leverage, so where our footprint is larger so that we actually can make a difference and have that leverage with suppliers. And we're in the process of creating plans at both the country and the portfolio level. And I'll stop shortly, but I think I also, before we launched our commitment, I also come back to one of the comments that one of my colleagues from Oxfam said to us. And it was that they simply wanted businesses to recognise that there was an issue with poverty, wages and global value chains, and that wasn't okay. And recognising that it's a complex issue, it's not something we are going to be able to solve overnight, but just to recognise this needed to be addressed as soon as possible by as many people as possible, with a collaboration between governments so that legal minimum wages were actually at a living wage level, by investors to ask questions of companies who are not paying living wage, by society as well, and civil society to really put pressure on companies that were not paying those living wages. So I'm going to stop there. really, or maybe one other point actually before I do, because it's also very important. Business benefits, we supported a report that was published earlier this year, created by Business Fights Poverty, Shift, Harvard and Cambridge University, all about the business benefits of living wage, because, you know, business tend to talk about the cost of living wage. They need to talk about the benefits, but also the cost of not paying a living wage. I think that's really important. And my final point is living wage enablers. We need to really address the barriers to living wage, and one of those is data. And the tireless work of the anchors of Fair Wage Network, of Wage Indicator, has given us good data, but we need more data, and we also need an alignment of data. And that's why, as Unilever, we're really supportive of moves to create a publicly accessible, free database of living wage data, because we believe that will really make a huge change. And we believe that everyone, whether it's government, civil society, workers themselves, should know and have the ability to know what a living wage should be for where they're working. We think that's really important. I'm definitely going to stop there. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rachel. This is really enlightening. If I may, would like to follow up on some of the point, because such a journey that, you know, Unilever has taken so far. If you can maybe list some of the key challenges that, you know, the company has observed, and how you overcome those, or maybe on the way, or trying to tackle those challenges.
Of course. I think one of the points, as I briefly mentioned, is really just understanding, you know, before you make a commitment around living wage, whether that's for your direct employees or for your suppliers and business partners, it's really that understanding of, you know, what is a living wage? What does that really mean? How do our different elements of pay fit into that? So one of the challenges was really making certain that everyone, as we say, was on the same page, understood what we meant. I think that's one challenge. The second challenge is, you know, the big question, well, how much is it going to cost us? That's a very difficult question to answer. And I come back to what a former chief supply chain officer always used to say, which I said is, well, you know, no one asks about what's the cost of not paying a living wage. So I think, you know, that's an issue that has often come up. And the third barrier really is around that availability of data. I think the fact that there is, if I'm honest, sometimes quite a discrepancy between what the living wage rate is in a certain country, calculated in a different way by different methodologies. When you're practically talking about implementing a commitment, so when we are saying to we have about 50,000 tier 1 suppliers, between now and 2030, we want you to pay a living wage. It's really important that there's clarity on what that amount is. So, you know, Cara's absolutely right. It is much more than the figure, and it can't just be the figure in isolation, but we also need to make certain that we are getting greater alignment and understanding of what that figure actually is.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. And listening to Rachel, I would like to turn to Carla on, you know, especially on the part of, you know, when we talk about data, and it's not only data for the companies, you know, it's important for workers to know, you know, what would be the amount of income or wages that would be sufficient for them to survive. What are the key principles when it's come to, you know, identified key data and assessment and coming up with, you know, a living wage benchmark? I know that there's various methodologies, and different countries and different sectors may kind of like, you know, have a different approaches. But what would be the key principle that, you know, we should not forget when it comes to, you know, data and assessing, you know, the gap of between living wage benchmark and the real wages? And lastly, in terms of data, is disaggregated data such as, you know, gender, disaggregated data, it's key, and why? Thank you, Cara.
Thanks so much, and huge thank you there to the previous two representatives, because I think those are really brilliant examples of how living wage can practically be implemented. within the context of a business. And I particularly appreciate this point on reducing costs as well. It's often not part of the discussion. And I think there are huge benefits for business, and the sooner that's recognised for them, the better. In terms of components of living wage, well, broadly speaking, we've often got a legal context in country, which is determining the minimum wage. So there are often some legal standards as a starting point, but also industry benchmarks. And I think that benchmarking, and it's been referenced by the two previous panelists, Chuck and Rachel, benchmarking where your company is against others in the sector, against national standards, is really important. And having that data to be able to do that, so you know where you're starting at, is absolutely crucial. And that takes time and it takes effort. And it also means building up stronger engagement with the workforce, often for many companies. So making sure that there is strong feedback and worker voice and worker representation. And I think this is where the role of unions come in. But essentially, the first point is, what are the legal standards? Are wages being paid? And are workers given understandable information about those employment conditions and what their wages are? Because then a conversation can be had about the adequacy of what's being received. And then ensuring that there aren't deductions from wages, which we see sadly quite often as disciplinary measures or for services a company might be providing. Clarity on that is so important, because I think, as Rachel said, it's no point having a living wage if the worker is working in conditions of bonded or forced labour, or discretionary payments are being taken by a company that the worker does not agree with, or are in fact sometimes illegal. So I think that's really important to remember. And then we also have a lot of international conventions. We've heard reference to the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which I think give a great framework. And we have the International Labour Organization conventions. There is one on minimum wage fixing. There is one on protection of wages. There's on equal remuneration, which is so important when we're talking about gender. So those principles are there. It's a case, I think, often of following them. And the other aspect, I guess, around data, if I'm not leaping ahead too much, is also about looking at the impact of bringing in those living wage measures and being able to track that as that's happening, because being able to show the benefits are really important in encouraging others to take action too. And I would just use this opportunity to say that I think it's really important to think about this in the context of a whole business model. If a business model is relying on cheap or forced labor, it's a redundant business model. Quite frankly, it's not one that's fit for purpose in the world. And I do believe that ultimately those business models are going to struggle. So even if one is more concerned perhaps about the profit than the human rights impact, I don't think it makes business sense. But there is obviously a very strong moral imperative here too. And what that leads us to look at then are purchasing practices and are the other aspects of business. So what do those relationships with suppliers look like? Can a supplier, once you've got your own house in order and a business has looked at their own direct employees, what's possible for a supplier, and how can that supplier be supported on that journey towards a living wage? And having that open conversation so that one is aware of what is happening. I think sometimes there is a fear of collecting data because of what a business might find. And actually, we know there are problems everywhere. We have a global distributed food system. And that ultimately means there is a long distance often from consumer to producer, and from the not just supplier but direct producer back to consumer. That takes time to change, and we need to recognize that and recognize there are ways of doing this through purchasing practice contracts, through building strong relationships with suppliers, and through supporting them through the process of enabling a living wage. And you will probably all have heard of the example of Tesco's, which at the beginning of this year committed to providing top-up payments to suppliers of bananas so that those workers would be given a living wage. I think that's a great example of leadership, of committing to making a practical change, much as Unilever and CB have done as well. So I hope that answers your question. Feel free to press me if I've gone off on a different tangent there, Jacques.
No, thank you. No, this is wonderful. But maybe just deep dive a little bit further. Of data, gathering from at the workers level, disaggregate between genders, and also, for example, like from the experience that Kun Suthasini shared with us, migrant workforce and then the national home workforce, you have these differences, and how important to understand, different needs and different requirements of different people. So workers are, they have different needs in which how we can, is that too complicated, or is it possible to build that into the construct of a living wage?
In short, I think that's absolutely possible. I think it comes back to working together. So first off, having a review of what data is available in a company. Disaggregation, absolutely, that's vital. And knowing who the workforce are. We have that situation globally of many migrant workers being employed in agriculture. And I think as Suthasini has articulated really well, there are very specific challenges if you are a worker coming from outside of the country where you're working, and very specific risks to yourself and your family that need to be understood by employers. As well as others within the landscape, such as government and non-governmental organisations, the latter who tend to raise these issues. And I think this, I sort of mentioned it, but this is where having a strong union and a strong communication pathway with a workforce is really, really important. So you're collecting information, you have a mechanism for raising challenges, for raising grievances, and having that openly discussed within a company or business before you get to a point that it's escalated and it's very hard to resolve an issue. And I think that's in everybody's interests to be supporting collective bargaining, because we know that collective power results in changes to wages. And whilst it can take a long while, and it can mean involving a lot of stakeholders at one time, it tends to result in a good outcome. And I think also being aware of what data is being collected by government and others. There's no point duplicating. I think where it's, and this is why I like this idea actually of having a transparent living wage database available online. Absolutely. Because I think there's duplication often going on between different entities. And so how can we all start to align, even if data is being collected under different methodological protocols? There is an opportunity to share and align, and at least even if we have different ideas about living wage calculation, we understand where the differences are. So I think it's possible. I think it needs investment, though. I think it needs government buy-in too. And I think it does need a spirit of cooperation as well. And being able to step outside of, feeling that there's competition, being able to create those spaces which are not about competitive business discussions, but which are about, fundamentally, how do we realize rights and all move in the same direction? And I did notice there was a great question that came in here, which I think relates, which is really about what's the environment in terms of social support. So we saw during COVID, some countries, businesses took the lead and provided support to their employees. They were furloughed in the UK, for example, given some salary, some income during periods of unemployment. And some governments took that decision as well to provide that kind of financial support. I think it was one of the most interesting experiments we have seen in terms of providing a certain level of basic income under a situation of crisis and challenge. And it shows that that's possible, whilst in some places that wasn't implemented well and many workers suffered. Actually, what we saw is that in general, this is possible to do. So we need to look at what does that mean for the future? Those investments are possible. We can provide people with a living wage. So let's make sure that we're collecting information and looking at what happened during COVID, both positive and negative, and then building on those good examples of social support and those positive examples, which I think ultimately very good for workers to have that support. And it's an absolute bonus for business as well.
Thank you, Carla.
You're welcome,
before I go to Kun Suthasini, I would like to maybe come to Kun Chok first. We have, Carla has discussed and point out, and including a ratio on the point of, a collaborative effort. So that is, the work together with workers, the communication channel in order to access data. So for CP, if I may ask you if you can share the experience of, so far, when you're looking into the data, what are the key elements for your consideration? The exchange and communication channel with workers and workers group that in the companies, and for example, especially it might be challenging for even in the home front, where in Thailand there's no living wage benchmark existing at the moment. How CP come about and construct and do the assessment where you are at the forefront of identifying what should be living wage as well. And so if you can help us understand the process on that front. And I was told by the technicians is that if you haven't, maybe you may want to mute the original audio in the interpretation button. Thank you.
เดี๋ยวถ้างี้ขออนุญาตตอบเป็นภาษาไทยนะครับ
I speak in Thai. Okay, welcome. As for the challenges that we have found, that CP has found, Thailand has no clear amount of living wage, and the number that we have adopted is minimum wage. We stick to that minimum wage in Thailand after Thaksin Shinawatra administration. Since that until now, there has been change. You can see that this varies from one region to another region. 336 baht in high cost of living provinces, and the least 313 baht. The amount varies. We have factories across the country, and an issue is the fact that we have factories across the country, the varying amount of wages. When we move our workers, we don't know how to treat them in case we move to a higher cost of living province. If we move them to a lower cost of living provinces, it is an issue for management. This is why we adopted the calculation formula to facilitate the management and to allow the wages to be higher than minimum wages. 313 to 331. Okay, it is 20 baht difference per day. So the company has said that to pay wages which are higher than minimum wages, we identified the possibility. We look at the reality. If we moved to the living wage that which the workers use to support their families, it is very difficult. So we do this step by step. So we would like to have a single amount of wage which is higher than minimum wage. This is the first step. The second step, we created trust in relation to the calculation methodology with the management. As I have told you, we refer to 3 and 4 sources, and we presented this to the management to develop the economic skill. To create acceptance, we need to get buy-in from the management of CPF. As for the next step, in relation to creating trust in the calculation formula, the third step, as Kun Rachel has said, our company, we have been operating. We need to look at compensation. We need to look at the income. If we get lost, we cannot survive. Now we cannot continue our operation if we get lost. So we have to think about the remuneration. We need to think about the capacity of paying that. We need to show the calculation to the management to make sure that we can pay the living wages. The step 4, people talked about, deductions. CPF, when we make payment, there will not be too many conditions. Our conditions are not complicated. We try to simplify calculations to reduce complexity. We don't need to do much calculation. The benchmark, if it is the wage which is higher than minimum wage, is good enough, and we promote the capacity of them to build the capacity. We upgrade the skills of our workers. This aims to allow them to have more knowledge and capacity. And finally, once they have enhanced expertise and capacity, okay, we will get benefit from that. As for communication, if we do something and the management knows this, but the managers, the workers do not know what we are doing. So we don't know what the actual issues are. If we don't know the actual issues are, we cannot solve them. And then the problems will become worse. Thank you. Because we have limited time, I would like to go back to you later, and I would like you to give brief responses. And how about expanding this to other companies, and how about creating collaboration within other companies in the food industry to set the standard which is aligned in relation to living wages? Have you have a discussion with other companies? I don't know about the progress, like in the association or with other companies in Thailand. I don't know if you have talked with them in relation to living wages.
โอเคในสเตจตัวนี้ครับ
In this stage
ครับแล้วทางเดี๋ยวนะครับเดี๋ยวงงภาษา
Can you hear Thai? I don't hear Thai. Have you collaborated with other companies in the food industry or other industries to create a standard of living wages? Have you exchanged something with other companies? And what is the progress? CPF, we have been trying to identify the standard. This is the first year of our implementation. And now we don't know the standard criteria. We don't know, and we don't know if they can be applied. Actually, we have a plan to, as for the question about our partnership, we have a plan to partner with other agencies. We conducted study with leading institutions with Nestle and Unilever. These of them, these companies, they have partnership as well. So we are in the process of discussion of our procurement departments, because we have a lot of suppliers who we partner with. We will do a prioritization. What will we do next? I think personally, apart from CPF Thailand, we have CPFs in other countries as well. As for CPF Thailand, I think we should do, we should improve our part in Thailand first before we scale up. Kun Suthasini, Kun Pik, can you hear me? Kun Pik, could you please unmute your microphone? in view of CSOs and workers, the next steps, what should happen? What should the next steps happen in Thailand and beyond Thailand? Okay, companies have shared something with you. What should be the next steps and what are the roles of workers in this area? What should be the roles of workers in this? Talking about how to realize fair wages, I think it is possible. I would like to tell you that 20 years ago, I worked in a factory, a garment factory, export company. You know, I saw clothes that we made in the department store. My salary at that time was 2,000 baht, but I saw the clothes that I made, which cost 3,000 baht. You know, I worked for the whole month and I earned 2,500 baht, but the cost of a t-shirt is over 3,000 baht. But talking about fair wages, why is this not possible? It is possible because our products, the products of workers, we don't just make one piece of clothing, one product. Each day we produce a lot of products, many pieces of products. And one factory has a lot of production lines. They produce a lot per day. So fair wages are possible. I don't know how much it is, but it must be okay. Must be able to support the workers themselves, and the wage, as other speakers have said, the wages must be able to be used to support other two family members, someone behind us, right? Currently, after I heard from other speakers, currently they have only 20 working days. You know, they earn money for 26 days, not 30 days. 31 baht, 26 days, they get around 6,000, 8,600 baht something. But given their expenses, 1,500 rental, the cheapest one, including electricity and water, 2,500, and food, they don't eat 26 days a month, but they eat 30 days a month, not including clothing, not including tax. You know, cost for association, the tax they have to pay, social tax, you know. Okay, 9,070 baht is their expense, at least. So we need to ensure fair wages to allow them to survive. So I understand businesses have to change their perspectives. They have to think that the workers are human beings and they are partners in their production. Workers, they have premises, machines, facilities. They have, you know, okay, they have capital 15%, but 80% are workers in the production line, which are their partners. We are not demanding you to give us on a 50-50 basis, but you should provide fair wages for workers so that they can survive. To reduce conflict, to allow us to have a discussion with employers, businesses should allow workers to organize trade unions so that they have table for negotiation in case the wages are not sufficient. They should provide the opportunity for them to talk with the employers, and both parties will work side by side, and this can reduce the conflict between the employers and the employees. And we have to think about this. You know, workers, we are producers. Why don't we have a chance to consume what we have produced? Thank you, Kun Pik.
Thank you for your the sharing. This is, I think, straight to the point and echo several of the key notion that has been discussed today. The value of collaboration and channel of the voice that need to be heard and to construct the issues of how we tackle the wage collectively. So it's probably not the issues of the companies only, but because it's the life and livelihood and family of the workers. So, voices of workers changing with company is such a crucial point. And we also learned that this is a journey. So it's not a one step or a one-stop service and everything could change in a one action. It's a journey, and we heard that from CPSO. It's a step. And then there need to be people to have buy-in also within the company itself and go moving beyond that. At this point, we have exactly 9 minutes towards the end of the session. I would look at the questions that has been sent in and read that out, and then ask Rachel, Carla, Kunchok, and Sutasini to help respond to those. One from Beck Wallace. This is addressing to Rachel. Would you be able to outline how Unilever approach employment opportunities from a gender perspective? You mentioned your work with Oxfam in the factory in Vietnam, for example. Can you say anything about how Unilever approaches have changed since then regarding employment and progression opportunities for women? Rachel, and
Sure.
sorry to ask you to be brief. Thank you.
Absolutely. So very briefly, really focusing on getting women in leadership positions, doing everything we can to have a truly equitable and inclusive culture at Unilever. So that means really looking at our policies and practices, making certain we don't have any unconscious bias. Most importantly, listening to women in terms of what they need. So that means better childcare, maternity and paternity policies, looking after elder care as well, and really making certain that we're continuing to make that progress, but importantly, listening to what women work and need. It is a journey. We're continuing to make improvements and looking both in our own operations, but also in terms of our extended supply chain. So really focusing on also supplying from inclusive and diverse women-led and owned businesses. So lots more, but I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. And that kind of like leads me to the other questions about how large company can help, realize living wage in the supply chain, support SME and smaller companies in the supply chain. And I believe Carla has touched on that. But if you want to, elaborate a little bit further, the key ingredients of, achieving living wage beyond, big players, because some people may say, okay, this is only, big guys that can do this, but how the smaller business can do that, maybe together in the supply chain, what would be the solution? And since I'm on that, what would be the role of the government in realizing a living wage? Because today we focusing on the role of the private sector. Carla.
Thanks very much. I will be brief. I think essentially, we need to do this collectively. That's my first reflection on this. So it's great when you've got a large company working on this and leading and showing the way. And I think it's about that support from those bigger companies, those that are sourcing from suppliers, often who are much smaller, in helping them to travel along the journey too. Once you have implemented yourself, then you are able, I think, to support others to do that. I think if it's a smaller company, sometimes you may have a much easier or direct line of communication between workers and those in management. And that's been touched on by Sudan Dinasi as well. That is so important. I think it relates to what Rachel said about gender and what Chok has said about getting buy-in on their methodology and support for that. That strong communication pathway with workers where issues can be raised, where they can feed back on wages and on challenges they are facing, where you have that live and immediate communication on what's going on. That might be how a political context is affecting people. It might be how changes in the environment are affecting them. Being able to respond to that in an agile and quick manner as management, I think is very important. So recognizing it's a journey, recognizing that those smaller suppliers need support to change things, that it's great to see shifts in purchasing practices. And I think we've seen that with Unilever in particular and others. But that needs to come hand in hand with that approach of, okay, if you're not there now and you've heard from your workers and you know what the issues are, excuse me, in terms of providing them with additional support and additional income, then okay, what's the pathway? Let's put in, we have a lot of companies with policies at the moment, but let's put in some time-bound targets. Let's aim for when we're going to change the situation, and let's measure ourselves and see how we get there as we're traveling along that journey. And that means having credible benchmarking, being clear about the methodology, which I appreciate Chok saying, and including workers in this journey as much as possible. And again, often that's via unions or it's via working committee representation, but that is so important to this whole process. Thank you. I hope that answers the question.
Yes. Thank you, Carla. Maybe it's on the public sectors, the government, but I might come back to that. คุณโชคครับไม่แน่ใจได้ยินตัวภาษาไทยไหมฮะ
So can you hear Thai or you are listening English? Could you please click on Thai?
ได้ครับโอเคครับคุณโชคครับเมื่อกี้
คุณโชค
ที่บอกว่าคือมันเป็นการเดินทางนะฮะ
Yeah, as I have told you, it is a journey and it cannot be resolved overnight. And the first step, you referred to, minimum wages, which vary from one area to another area. The first step, the second step, is it possible for CP to provide monthly employment? Kun Sutatini, she has said that they get minimum wage, but the amount of money they earn per day is not equivalent to that of the salary for the whole month for 30 days. I don't know if it can be the first step of CP to pay for the whole month for 30 days. When we started announcing the use of the amount of wages which is higher than minimum wage at the beginning of the year, we pay them with a higher amount which is higher than minimum wage. As for workers, from the daily basis to a monthly basis, the method that we have applied is, as I have told you, we look at their knowledge and expertise. For workers, the first step, when they first come, they will be daily workers. If they can improve their knowledge and capabilities based on our standard, if they reach the level that we have set, they can be converted from daily workers to monthly workers. We have no time frame. It depends on those workers, depending on their capabilities. If they can achieve the standard, okay, we convert them, change their status. As for our implementation, at the beginning of the year, we started implementing this, and the next step, apart from the salary, we will pay top-up payment. We pay them if they can have the skills achieved our benchmark. We will pay them more. We will give them top-up. Thank you, Kun Chok.
Chat, maybe you can have a look, but then we only have 1 minute left, so I'm not attempting to take that challenge. But just one point, there was a sharing from Kun Prat from Thai Union about these figures of global living wage, a coalition for Thailand urban area of 13,027 baht. Thank you for sharing, Kun Prat. We very appreciate that. So that we can look into that and explore that further. So I think we come to the hour exactly. I would like to use these opportunities to express really sincere appreciation for all the panelists who have shared the valuable experiences and insight. I would also like to say thank you to our interpreter and the staff team, Kun Rapasa and more. Without them, we wouldn't have the session today. All along the discussion we have on Zoom, at least 60 people staying from start to the end, and much more following us on Facebook Live. So this is great. Hope the discussion today has helped many to understand better the approaches and plans, together with the benefit and challenges along the journey towards a living wage, and also helps generate interest among both businesses, CSO workers, and other stakeholders. For Oxfam and the CSO Coalition for Sustainable and Ethical Seafood, we are ready and keen to continue the dialogue, to be part of the journey to promote the wages that would enable decent living for women and men who play a critical part in producing food for us. So thank you once again, Rachel, Kun Chok, Carla, and Kun Suthasini. Very, very appreciated. And thank you for, for those who following the discussion. Let's build this forward, as John said right at the beginning. So this is part of the journey, and we are moving towards that goal. Though it's challenging, there's questions on increasing inflation. So I know this is another hurdle and thing that we need to tackle when it's come to living wage as well. But then this is a good, really first start of the discussion that's happening today. So thank you and goodbye.
Thank you so much. Wonderful job, Jack.
Thank you. Bye bye. ขอบคุณครับ